made up of many tools. There are many different tasks that you can do in Pencil. When we start to scale, where can task-based AI break down?
I think as you start to scale, and as you know, when you build essentially a workflow where you're trying to get to an endpoint of the output of the creative, there's a lot of things that goes into that process. And as that process kind of scales, both in terms of the quantity of output that is generated, but also the complexity of the processes, without being able to very clearly define each step of that process, and then also have some form of quality assurance or control during the process, is typically where you're going to start to see a workflow break down, in the sense that the quality might lack, or maybe you didn't capture all of the details that you needed at each step of that particular workflow that you'd be working on.
Okay, so how do workflows support with that? So thinking particularly around like consistency, governance, putting those checks into place. What's the benefit of a workflow?
So I think there's a few different ways that workflows actually support this. One is it's a very easy visual representation of your actual workflow of what is happening at each step. So that's one, you can kind of visualize and see what is actually going on as I'm building out this workflow or executing this workflow. The second is you have the ability to break down the individual tasks to very specific tasks, whether that is working with an agent, creating something and refining it and going through multiple revisions before you actually get to the final end result that you then want to take further in your process. That is another way. So essentially this work of revision and refinement within your workflow, you have super granular control over it, and you're able to check the work along the way. So I would say those are the two most powerful things. And the other thing is it's very repeatable, in the sense that you can actually save your workflow, right? And have others see how did you get from point A to B to C, and then how can they use that and replicate it. So typically you have a process within marketing or creative, software development. It doesn't really matter. Everyone kind of has their process unique to their organization and their team.
Yeah.
And being able to essentially visualize it and have control over each step, and then sharing that, also means that you then can replicate that workflow depending on the task that you kind of have on an ongoing basis, that you know these are reoccurring.
And that repeatability makes for so much more efficiency.
Exactly. Yeah. So it means that you can build something and I can kind of use what you built for my particular kind of workflow, or I can take what you already created and build on top of it to tweak it for my specific needs.
Perfect. And before we dig in to exact capabilities and features of workflows in Pencil, we've heard quite a lot over the last couple of weeks, particularly from our live stream with Will last week, about Pencil's journey towards being a marketing OS. How does workflows play a part within that journey?
I think it plays a part in this kind of OS system as, again, being able to execute a pretty complicated workflow end to end, working both with agents directly, potentially models, previous work that has been created, and constantly having humans in the loop to essentially work very closely with the agents throughout that process. So you can, to give you an example of what it might look like, let's say you're running a campaign on one of your ad accounts and you get some data back, and now you have some data performance. You can use that data and you want to analyze it and get some insights into what is happening here, what is working. And then you go and maybe do some market research of saying, this is the audience that I'm going after. What are the current trends or insights that I should pay attention to? And then you might merge the two that essentially says, here's the performance that I'm seeing, here's some of the trends, and how do I combine that into a campaign idea that I want to go and work on. And then you take that campaign idea and you go and say, okay, now I want to conceptualize how to bring this to life. And you can do that. And you go through this process that essentially gets to the final output that you then want to go back to your ad account or ad platform and essentially start running and seeing how you can improve the performance of the ads that you might be running. And I think that is where this kind of operational systems come in, where you will have people typically responsible for a specific area being able to collaborate with agents throughout that process in a very transparent visual way to essentially seamlessly bring together the process from inside all the way through concepting to final output, and then kind of bringing back the loop to where those new assets that have made its way out into the market goes back into the evaluation phase, and it kind of starts over.
Perfect. So it's kind of unlocking a really integrated flow end to end across really every marketing function I can think of.
Exactly. Much
Yeah.
much more elegant way of putting it, and that's exactly it. Yes.
Perfect. So in the context of Pencil, how are workflows going to differ from just building yourself a set of custom agents?
So I think the way will differ very much depend on kind of the task at hand. So depending on what you're actually trying to do, whether it is, again, gaining or extracting some form of insights, or planning a form of campaign, or actually creating something very visual, it really depends on what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and you can kind of tweak it to your needs. I will say that some of the unique things that we're thinking about as we're building this is actually how do we bring in this kind of quality control into the process and make that very seamless as you go through this. So that entails both scoring, which we have at Pencil, right, where you essentially can set up your own custom score and get a score on the predictive, essentially, how well does it adhere to your brand, or how well do you think it will perform based on ads you've been running in the past. So that's one part of it, where you essentially can get very live feedback in terms of scoring and predictive scoring. The other thing is, how do we bring in others to essentially review work? So you might not be the person that is responsible for building the workflow or this process, but you might be one of the stakeholders that actually needs to have eyes on whatever gets output from the workflow. So bringing in reviews and these kind of rich notifications into it is something that we are implementing as part of this, to essentially bridge the gap there of the creative process, the review process, and the iterative process into one kind of flow. And I think those are the things that are pretty unique to Pencil.
So it's bringing in, that really quite rich sequencing and a level of, I guess, marking your own homework as you go.
Almost like that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was working on a kind of practice workflow earlier today where I was generating product images, then having a node straight into scoring those product images, so that only the product images that reached a certain threshold would then generate video, which is just so much more efficient as a way of working. Whereas previously you might have had an agentic flow that just took those images, made a video, and then you'd realize after generating a video that the creative quality wasn't good enough.
Exactly. So it's really a way of catching it much earlier in the process and ensuring you're focusing on the right things. And then again, also having humans involved, like Pencil is very much a tool for creators and marketers as a whole, right? Bringing them into the loop as well of this process, I think is really important to ensure that the collaboration between agentic workflows, but also humans being involved and collaborating with agents is so important throughout this process.
Yeah. And I mean, on that note, I think there's definitely an art to creating workflows well. So what would you say are the core building blocks of an effective workflow?
I think it is understanding the task through and through. So what I mean by that is, as you know, writing prompts can be quite difficult as it is to begin with. But it becomes really difficult when you're trying to essentially jam in a lot of instructions into one prompt. So many times what you will find is more effective is actually breaking out a complex task into mini tasks, which helps the agent or even models be more specific and intentional about the work that they're doing. So if you can do that and have that mindset going into building a workflow, I think you will have much more success in getting high quality output. So my main tip would essentially be try to think about the overarching process. What is the end goal that you're trying to do? How do you get there and what are the inputs along the way? And try to break the task down as specific as possible. It will help you in multiple ways of one, your prompt will hopefully become a little less complex because you don't need to jam everything into a one-shot prompt. You can kind of break down your prompt as well. And two, you will have the control as you go through the workflow, as we just spoke about. You can essentially look at the output from each granular step and then make small tweaks along that process to get to the final output. So instead of trying to guessing where in your prompt is it breaking down, you can kind of be very particular and saying, oh, this is the step where there's a mismatch between what I'm trying to do and the output that I'm getting.
Yep. And I mean, I think part of this for me is, yes, that whole view, yes, starting from the output that you want and mapping back. I think there are certain things that people already do within the platform that will lend themselves to similar ways of thinking in this as well. I mean, I know a lot of the step-based work that you're talking about are things that I kind of simulate in feeds at the moment, working left to right, cell to cell. What's the benefit of a workflow over that kind of stepped sequential work?
I actually think they complement one another a lot, and it's almost like the work that you can see in feeds and sheets. Workflow is almost an extension of that. So the real power of sheets and feeds, once you've set up your sheet the way you want it to and you have it working, is just being able to produce at scale. I mean, it's quite shocking the ways you can actually have it work and the output that you get once it's set up, again to your point, kind of the way that you want from left to right. I think workflows very much complements that. So the tricky part to working with feeds and sheets, I think in general, is the setup part. It's not so much the scaled production, because once you have it working, you're essentially dragging and dropping columns down into multiple rows to just get the output that you want. Workflows can hopefully complement that process a little bit by, again, making it more visual and easy to see, so that each step and the setup process becomes very easy. And then sharing that and having people either duplicating what you have already done and adjusting it to their specific use case, or building on top of it will become much easier. What we also have planned for workflows is actually kind of a joint functionality between the two. So you can envision yourself building a workflow that gets you the output that you're hoping for, and then almost toggling into this production at scale, and you start actually doing more work like you would see in feeds and sheets that will make it a more rich experience in terms of, here's my visual workflow, I can see what happens step by step, and the setup is easy, and then I toggle into this more production at scale view where I then can go and mass produce or run this workflow however many times I want for the specific output that I'm looking for.
Perfect. I mean, I think for me, one of the real joys of working with a workflow is that it can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be. In terms of adoption, I think a lot of our clients are going to be after what are the immediate quick wins with workflows. Kind of let's get our heads around a simple workflow and then build up, and that kind of journey of adoption. So when we were conceiving of workflows, clients wanted this. Clients had specific use cases this would work for. What kinds of use cases were you looking at as being like early adoption use cases for clients?
It's a really good question, and the approach that we've taken to this is we do a lot of work with our clients, right? And we kind of get our hands dirty, we get in there and we try to help them along, both from a training perspective of getting them very comfortable with the tool, as well as to production, essentially helping them get the final parts that they're looking for a
Yeah.
particular campaign. So the approach that we've taken is we've almost taken a survey of what are the typical use cases that we see across all of our clients, and how can we create templates around those so that we can provide everyone that has access to Pencil a starting ground to essentially start plugging in their own assets or tweaking certain things to match what they're looking for specifically. And in that way, make it very easy to get started with workflows, kind of get your head around how should I think about structuring it? How should I be building it? And then, as I mentioned, you can duplicate those templates and start building on top of it. And I think that is almost like a foundation for everyone to get started without feeling scared about how do I get started. You kind of have 9 templates of very common use cases that you can try out for yourself, and then start building on top of or tweaking to your specific needs. So that's kind of the approach that we have taken to this.
Perfect. So there's a real way for clients to kind of evolve their use over time, really build up, work out what's working,
Absolutely.
and then work into kind of iterative development of more and more complex flows.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like reverse engineering the simple stuff that we put in front of you from the beginning, to your point, and you can really go crazy and start building some really complex workflows that we know clients have. And it's just so very difficult to foresee what that will look like, just because every client has their own unique workflows and ways of working, but they're also a unique product for in a specific market with a unique customer base. So being able to almost peanut butter spread this to cover everything would not really work. You almost need to empower customers to build it to their specific needs, whether it's for their products or their audiences or the channels that they're going after.
Perfect. Now I'm thinking, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Let's do
If
it.
I was sitting here listening to this as a client, I might be thinking, wow, that would be my first thought. I think my next thought would be, okay, this can get complex. How can these workflows end up sprawling? And what guardrails can we start putting in place to make sure that as workflows become more complex, we're still in control?
So that's a really good question. Thinking within workflows itself, there are a few things that it will come with immediately. So one thing is that workflows that are being built by a user kind of belongs to that user, meaning as of right now, there will not be a high collaboration, meaning if you build something that is working for you and you kind of don't want anyone else to go in there and mess it up for you, they won't be able to do that. They can just duplicate it and start building on top of it. The other things that we have are kind of outside of workflows as it stands, but are really powerful features inside of Pencil as a whole. One is custom roles, where you can set your own permissions and kind of give access to certain actions inside of Pencil. Very straightforward. And the other is something that will come out very soon, and I hope I'm not overstepping by announcing this already, but you will be able to build kind of rules for actions that you can do to ensure that certain quality is met before you actually, for example, export something from Pencil. So let's say I create some type of work before I can export it out of the platform and push it out into a market. Maybe it needs to meet a certain threshold of a score, as we mentioned earlier, or maybe it needs to be set to approved by one of the stakeholders that needs to sign off on this particular deliverable before it actually can be exported. So those are some of the guardrails that we are implementing to ensure that nothing too crazy can happen.
Perfect. And I love that I managed to get an announcement out of you on this call. Now, there's a lot to think about here. I'm also looking at the clock because as much as I'd love this discussion to go on for hours, we're time capped here. What I think would be really interesting to know is let's go back to a slightly bigger scale. So we've got a lot of implementations happening at the moment. There's lots of different parts coming together in the formation of Pencil as the marketing OS. Within that general realm of thinking, what should teams be thinking about implementing workflows, but also implementing other new features over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think we have a lot of cool stuff coming, especially now early in the year. Workflows is part of that. I think one of the things to really think about is almost do an evaluation of, again, how your team is operating and working. And I think that what you will find is that Pencil can, again, be a very complementary tool in fitting into your unique ways of working, whether it be processes through workflows where you can kind of eliminate some of the mundane kind of repetitive work that you don't really want to do, but it's really so important in order to have, a really strong marketing strategy and campaign running. To then also saying, how can we take it one step further and start exploring how agents within our workflow can support the way we not only execute work, but think about work. Like, I think a lot of people have mentioned this in the past, but using agents as a strategic partner is really powerful. And within Pencil, in beta right now, you can actually go and build your own agents with custom tooling that you have access to. I think we covered this maybe last week.
Yeah, we did.
So taking that approach of essentially saying, what are the areas that are very unique to my business, whether it is access to certain tools that I want to draw information from, and then thinking about how you can customize agents for those specific use cases or areas that you almost want an agentic partner with, and tailor it to your unique needs. That, I think, is something that everyone should start thinking about and explore, especially if you already have access to Pencil, because that is really going to set the tone, I think, for the rest of the year. As you start building workflows and everything else, you're going to see a lot more integration with agentic workflows, but also agentic kind of collaboration for your everyday task, and sometimes something that is not your everyday task.
Perfect. Now we're very nearly at the end of our chat. Before I come back to you for a final word, Doug, I'm just going to give a shout out to Pencil's enablement teams. So clients of Pencil have access to customer success management, our internal creative team, who are absolute powerhouse users of the Pencil platform. I obviously have to give a shout out to our educational provision in the form of training, content, and the community platform. With these releases, all of those enablement teams are geared up to help. So this is going to be a transitional phase for some clients moving into workflows as a new paradigm. But we're going to have content ready for you. We're going to have all of the right people equipped in all the right ways to help exactly at point of need. I'm also going to give a big shout out to the community platform in particular as the place to ask questions, to share successes, to give any advice or guidance to other users or receive advice and guidance from other users. Now, I've just said this is a big shift. I've just said, Doug, I'm going to let you have the last word. So give me the 30-second elevator pitch. Why should people care about agents, and how are agents going to transform our clients' lives?
I'm going to take part of it to just second your point. The the teams that we have, the enablement teams for training and creative, and especially the community, I would really encourage as a strong source of essentially getting information, tips and tricks, and also sharing knowledge, because that is a really strong source of material to essentially harness the full power of Pencil. In terms of the pitch for agents, I truly believe that this is just very early beginning to what we will see be the trend for the rest of the year, and probably for at least I don't want to say for the foreseeable future, because you never know in this space. Everything is working, like moving so fast, but this is definitely a trend that I see will continue and evolve. Again, just echoing what I said earlier, thinking about your current processes and where you can utilize agents, I would say there's never really a space where you can't utilize an agent, but it's more about tweaking an agent, being able to customize agent for your specific needs, whether it's a specific workflow or a specific task, being able to be very specific and intentional of what it is that that agent should be responsible for will set you ahead when you're starting to build agents and then start collaborating and working with them. I think the teams and companies that are able to do this the best way will have a huge advantage for this year. So while it might seem daunting, I wouldn't say it is. I see it as very exciting, and we're all seeing big benefits of this inside of Pencil as we're starting to use the same agentic workflows and agents across our own work streams.
Perfect. And do you know what? You're never going to get good at new developments in AI unless you get in there and do it. So watch this space for announcements about the launch of workflows. Please do go in there and try everything out. Now we're at time. Thank you so much for joining me, Doug. Thank you everyone who's watched live and on the recording. And we're going to have more of these launch live streams coming in the very near future as we build up towards Pencil as the marketing OS.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.